They had vanilla cake pops at the bar. That's the first thing I remember. Not the skyline, not the jazz trio, not even the fact that the event was held on the 39th floor of the nicest building in town. Just those stupid, fancy cake pops, lined up on a gold tray like they were too good to be eaten. I took one, then two. Then I looked up, and that's when everything in my body stopped working. Across the room, by the glass panels overlooking the river, she was smiling. My wife. My actual, legal, last name on the insurance wife. Laughing with a guy who looked like he'd just walked off a yacht ad. He leaned in, said something with a grin, and then I heard her say it. Clear as the martini in my hand. Single, she said. That word hit like cold steel. She wasn't drunk. Her voice didn't slur. She didn't stutter or glance around nervously. She said it like it was a fact, like she had rehearsed it. And me? I was standing 2 steps away. Literally. 2 steps. I don't even think she saw me. Now, before you start judging me for snooping, overreacting, or being one of those paranoid husbands, just know I wasn't even supposed to be there. I mean it. I wasn't invited. Not officially. It was her company's mid-year celebration, and plus ones were limited. That's what she told me 2 weeks ago while brushing her teeth. But something in me wouldn't sit still. Something felt off. For days. You ever feel that buzzing in your chest when your gut knows something, but your brain won't listen? That's what I'd been walking around with. Like I was being slowly cooked under a heat lamp. So yeah, I showed up anyway. I ironed my own shirt. I parked 2 blocks away. I climbed 39 floors because the elevator line was jammed. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was. And because I saw it. I heard it. And it broke me. Lenora, my wife of 8 years, who cried during our mortgage signing, who once said she'd never call another man babe, was telling some Armani-wrapped stranger that she was single, that she'd just gotten out of something heavy, that she was enjoying the freedom. I stood there, holding a cake pop, and then I walked backward, quietly, into the corridor. I didn't confront her. I didn't throw a drink or crash the conversation or say, "Excuse me, single?" No, I took the elevator down. I sat in my car, and I didn't cry. Not at first. I just stared at my hands for a long time like they weren't mine. Like they belonged to a guy who still believed his wife was proud to wear her wedding ring. She came home later that night and casually mentioned that someone mistook her for a guest speaker. I must have looked important, she laughed. I nodded, said I was tired, went to bed. But that night, while she slept, I opened her planner. I wasn't ready for what I found tucked inside. That's when the real unraveling started. And read it. I'm not sure I can put it all into one post. But I'm going to try. That planner. That stupid beige, leather-bound planner with the pin loop she never used. The one she always carried but rarely opened around me. It had been sitting on the hallway table like it belonged there, like it hadn't just betrayed me in silence hours before. She was asleep upstairs, snoring softly with that rhythmic hum she always made when she was 3 glasses in. I stood there barefoot in the hallway, staring at it. I don't even know what made me reach for it. Curiosity? Pain? Something darker? I opened it, and the world I thought I knew fell apart. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just a few sticky notes with scribbled times and places, most of which didn't match the schedule she told me. Dinner, with Jules, turned out to be marked with a completely different name, T. A recurring Friday coffee meeting didn't mention a client's name, just a little heart drawn in blue ink. But then, about 3 weeks back, I flipped to a Friday marked Carly's B-Day thing wine glass, and in tiny writing beside it, room 407, 8 p.m., were the red one. That wasn't a dinner. That wasn't a birthday. That was a rendezvous. I stared at that page for a long time, feeling this cold buzz settle over my spine like static. I went back 2 months. 3. Found more little notes. More initials. Sometimes numbers. Once, a sketch of lips and a winking emoji. Always hidden in the margins. Like she was daring herself to get caught. I should have woken her up. I should have demanded an explanation, shouted, asked her what the hell any of this meant. But I didn't. I just quietly closed the planner, placed it exactly where I found it, and sat in the kitchen for the next 5 hours while the refrigerator hummed louder than my own thoughts. I didn't even touch my phone. I just stared at the steam rising from my untouched tea and tried to remember when exactly our marriage started dissolving and how I had missed it. The next morning, Lenora acted like it was any other Saturday. She stretched, yawned, asked if we still had almond milk, then kissed my forehead and said she was meeting a client in town for brunch. I asked her who the client was. She paused just a hair too long before saying, "Oh, just a local boutique looking for a rebrand." No name, no details. Just another ghost story disguised as a routine. When the door closed behind her, I opened her laptop. I'd never done that before. It felt wrong. But I was already broken. What was left to protect? I typed her password, the one I watched her use for years. A mix of our cat's name and her college dorm number. And it opened. The first tab she hadn't closed was a Google document. The title? Weekend Story Ideas. It looked innocent. But when I opened it, my stomach turned. It was a list. Scenarios. Alibis. Literally labeled by dates. Tell C. Running errands with cousin. Tell C. Yoga with work friend. Take pics to prove. Tell C. Staying late at office. Blame client revisions. My name, reduced to a single letter. Like I was some fool she needed to outweed. And worse? Some entries were crossed out, like she'd already used them and checked them off a to-do list. I didn't know how to react. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I laughed. A strange, short laugh that sounded more like a cough. I felt like I'd wandered into someone else's life. Like I was watching a documentary of a man being slowly erased, and I was the last one to notice it. She came back 3 hours later with a croissant and a smile. Said she thought of me and brought my favorite. I stared at her. Just stared. I asked, "Was your client's name T?" Her face froze, just for a split second. Then she laughed, said, "What? No. Who's T?" Too fast. Too clean. I nodded, took the croissant, and said nothing else. That night, I began taking photos of everything. Her planner pages. Her screen. Even the way she arranged her shoes by the door, with one pair always missing on Thursdays. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I had become a silent archivist of betrayal. What do you do when your reality turns out to be performance art? Because I think I've been the audience this whole time. But I'm done watching. And what I did next, that's where this story gets even messier. I didn't set out to become a detective. I write nonprofit grant proposals for a living. I still double-check whether my car is locked 3 times before walking away. I'm not the guy who unravels conspiracies or uncovers secret lives. But when your wife's planner reads like a covert operations logbook and her laptop contains literal scripts of lies, you stop being a husband and start being something else. Something cold. Something focused. Something you never wanted to be. The first thing I did was buy a burner phone. Not to call anyone. I just wanted a camera and storage separate from our shared cloud. It felt like cheating in a strange way. Like I was doing something I would need to explain. But that guilt faded fast once I realized how easy it was for her to hide things right in front of me. I started small. Pictures of her planner pages, screenshots of her web tabs, voice memos of conversations I had with her when she didn't realize I was pressing record on my phone. It sounds obsessive, maybe even unhinged, but when you're being gaslit with a smile and a croissant, you need anchors to remind you you're not losing your mind. Then came the receipts. Literally. One afternoon, I accidentally picked up her coat instead of mine from the rack. I reached into the pocket to grab my car keys, and out came a folded receipt from a boutique hotel across town. The timestamp was 8:46 p.m. on a Thursday night, the same night she said she stayed late helping an intern fix a client presentation. She even came home with a USB stick that night, held it up proudly, said, "Proof of my labor." That USB? I plugged it in. It was empty. That receipt, though, that was real. Real ink. Real time. Real betrayal. And scribbled at the bottom was a note I hadn't expected. D+L 407. The initial wasn't T. It was D now. There were multiple. I wanted to believe that maybe it was a client's room. Maybe she was dropping off materials. But deep down, I knew. She doesn't write hearts for clients. She doesn't use ampersands casually. So I went further. I installed a discreet GPS tracker in the backseat pocket of her car. I told myself it was for safety, that I just wanted to make sure she was okay. But I knew better. The first week, I watched the little blinking dot move from her office to random coffee shops and back. Seemed normal. Nothing alarming. Then Friday came. Her girls' night was supposed to be at Maggie's place, her high school friend who lives upstate and posts every hour on social media. But Maggie didn't post anything that night. No dinner selfies. No dancing reels. Just radio silence. And Lenora's car? It didn't go upstate. It stopped at a private house in a gated neighborhood just outside the city, not listed on her contacts, not in our shared GPS history, nothing. I screenshotted it. Tracked how long she stayed. 4 hours and 17 minutes. The next morning, I asked, "How was Maggie's?" She said, "So fun. We played this terrible card game, drank boxed wine, it was chaos." I just nodded. Later that day, I made up an excuse to go for a drive. I told her I was looking for a replacement bulb for our porch light. I didn't even know what size bulb we used. I just needed an excuse to go back to that house. And that's when I saw him. Tall, athletic, barefoot in the driveway wearing gym shorts and a smirk. He was rinsing his car, completely oblivious to the way my stomach twisted just looking at him. And then, as if fate had a flair for theatrics, Lenora's scarf was hanging over his passenger seat. The same scarf she said she lost at the office 2 weeks ago. The same one I bought her on our anniversary trip to Charleston. She told me she left it in a cab and nearly cried. I took a photo of the car, the plate, and the scarf. I didn't confront him. I didn't march up or shout. I just got back in my car and drove 2 blocks away, pulled over, and started hyperventilating into the steering wheel. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system. She had constructed an entire parallel existence, and I had somehow become a footnote in her life. The man she came home to, played normal with, kissed out of routine, while her real moments were spent with people like Dee. But I wasn't going to be a footnote anymore. I needed answers. And so I did something I never imagined I'd do. I reached out to Maggie. What she told me made everything 10 times worse. I didn't know how to text Maggie. What do you even say in that situation? "Hey, sorry to bother, but did my wife use your name as an alibi while she was at another man's house?" I sat there in my car for 15 minutes, typing and deleting. My fingers hovered over the screen, frozen, like even the truth needed permission. Eventually, I just typed, "Hey Maggie, quick question. Did Lenora hang out with you last Friday? She said you had a girls' night." Just trying to remember if she brought back something of mine. I figured that was vague enough to not sound accusing, but sharp enough to get a clear answer. She replied 4 minutes later. "Nope. Haven't seen her in months." Why? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at her message while the world around me went quiet. All the suspicions, the lies, the planner notes, the fake USB, the scarf, they all suddenly had a witness. Someone on the outside of the web Lenora had spun. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like I was standing in the wreckage of my own denial. I called Maggie. She picked up on the 3rd ring and said quietly, "I figured this was coming." Her voice was cautious but honest. She told me Lenora had used her name a few times over the last year. Harmless stuff at first. I told Clifton we went to that outdoor jazz thing. Or, he thinks we're grabbing coffee. But more recently, Maggie said she started feeling uneasy, especially when Lenora stopped checking if it was okay to use her name. She just assumed Maggie would never say anything, that she wouldn't break the code. I didn't want to be involved, Maggie admitted. But she's gotten reckless. Like she doesn't even care if she gets caught anymore. Honestly, I thought you knew. That hit hard. I thought you knew. As if I was the only person in the dark. I asked if she knew who Dee was. There was a pause, then she whispered, "Yeah, Derek. He's a client of hers. Real estate guy. Married. 2 kids." I closed my eyes. Derek. Of course. The name had come up once or twice vaguely. Always in a work context. Always brushed aside. Then Maggie said something that broke me more than anything else had. "She talks about you, you know. She calls you her safety net. Says you're her calm place. Like you're a warm blanket she can crawl under when the world feels cold. But she also said she's outgrown that. Outgrown me." I hung up politely, thanked her, and sat in the driveway until it got dark. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I just watched the light in our upstairs bedroom flicker on. I knew she was in there. Probably brushing her hair, maybe watching a video on her phone, completely unaware that her entire illusion had shattered beneath her. I didn't sleep that night. I walked around the block twice. I found myself back at the place where we got engaged, the overlook near the bridge with the broken railing and the rusted sign. I sat on the same bench where I once knelt and asked her if she wanted to build a life with me. Back then, her yes felt like the first real one of my life. I was never the lucky guy. I was the safe choice. And now it turns out I wasn't even that anymore. The next day, she made pancakes. She sang in the kitchen like nothing was wrong. She danced in her socks. She kissed my cheek like I wasn't a man unraveling inside. I wanted to scream, to throw a plate against the wall, to confront her with every screenshot, every note, every receipt, every lie. But I didn't. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something bone deep and soul-crushing. She wasn't afraid. She didn't think I'd ever leave. She thought I'd stay because I always had, because I was quiet, because I forgave, because I loved her. And in that moment, something in me cracked. Not anger, not hatred, just silence. A sharp, still silence I'd never known before. That's when I decided I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I was going to wait. And when I moved, it wouldn't be a fight. It would be an exit. But first, I needed one last confirmation. I needed to see Derek with my own eyes. I needed to know the face of the man who got the version of her that used to belong to me. So I followed her. And what happened that night? I never could have imagined. It was raining the night I followed her. Not the cinematic kind of rain that makes streetlights glow and car roofs glisten like in the movies. No, this was the grimy, sideways kind. The kind that makes your windshield wipers squeal and the air smell like rust. I sat in my car 2 blocks away from our house, parked beneath a crooked oak tree that scratched the roof every time the wind shifted. She didn't know I'd left before her. I'd told her I was meeting an old college buddy for drinks downtown, something she didn't even pretend to question. She barely looked up from her phone. I watched as she came out an hour later, dressed in the black coat she only wears when she wants to feel expensive. Her hair was curled, her heels clicked, and she moved like she was walking into a memory she'd already played out in her head. I followed from a distance, careful not to stay directly behind her, doubling back once at a red light just to be sure. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my mind that it didn't feel real anymore. It felt like watching someone else's heartbreak. She didn't go to the office. She didn't go to a friend's. She didn't go anywhere that made sense. She drove straight to him. Derek lived on the edge of town, in one of those soulless developments that spring up like weeds next to highways, identical beige houses with spotless driveways and forgettable charm. His porch light was already on, warm and inviting, like it knew she was coming. She pulled into the driveway, killed the lights, and stepped out with the casual grace of someone who's done this more than once. I parked at the far end of the block and killed my engine. For 12 minutes, I watched them through his front window. Yes, I counted. 12 minutes of silence, of watching silhouettes merge and separate, of seeing her take off her coat and laugh at something I couldn't hear. He poured wine. She touched his arm. And when she kissed him, it wasn't some heat of the moment thing. It wasn't rushed or guilty. It was soft. Like love. I felt like I'd swallowed concrete. I wanted to do something, anything. I wanted to bang on the door. I wanted to scream at them both. But I stayed still. Because I wasn't ready yet. Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted finality. I took a photo. Just one. It wasn't incriminating. You could barely tell it was her in the window. But I didn't need proof anymore. I needed peace. Then the strangest thing happened. A second car pulled up. It was a white SUV. New. Clean. Family style. It parked at the curb across from Derek's house. I assumed it was a neighbor. But then a woman stepped out tall, confident, with a sharp posture and a handbag that cost more than my car's insurance. She walked right up to Derek's door and let herself in. I blinked. What I saw next rewrote everything I thought I knew. Through the window, Derek stood frozen. The wine glass in his hand trembled. Lenora turned, stunned, and dropped something, maybe her phone. And then the woman slapped Derek. Not once. Twice. It wasn't chaos. It was calculated. She wasn't out of control. She was in charge. Lenora said something, defensive and flailing. The woman raised a single finger, as if to say, "Don't even start." She turned to leave, but before she did, she glanced out the window, and for a split second, our eyes met. That's when I realized who she was. His wife. Derek was married. Of course. Maggie said it. But I never imagined the wife would show up. That she'd already know. That I'd be watching from the shadows as 2 marriages cracked open on the same night. I ducked lower in my seat, pulse pounding. The wife walked back to her car and drove off. Not in a hurry. Not in rage. Just done. She'd made her point. Derek closed the curtains after that. The show was over. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I drove home in silence. My hands were wet on the wheel, but not from the rain. I parked 3 houses down and walked in through the side entrance like I'd just gotten home from my imaginary drinks with my imaginary friend. Lenora was still out. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the blank TV screen. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was exposure. The illusion had cracked, and everyone could see inside. Lenora's secret world wasn't secret anymore. Not to me, not to Maggie, not to Derek's wife. And I suddenly realized something terrifying. She might not even care. I was no longer trying to figure out how to catch her. I was trying to figure out how to leave her without her noticing. Because the moment she realized I was no longer under her spell, I didn't know what she'd do. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she eventually slipped in beside me, humming some lazy tune under her breath like the evening had been nothing more than dinner and errands. She smelled like the same perfume she wore on our honeymoon, the one I hadn't noticed her wear in over 2 years. She reached for my arm in the dark and laid her head on my chest like she always did, as if I was still the fool who didn't know what she was doing every time she worked late. I kept still. I counted the seconds in my head until her breathing slowed and deepened, and I knew she was asleep. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was going to leave. Not storm out. Not fight. Not collapse into some pathetic monologue begging her to love me again. No. I was going to slide out of this marriage so quietly, so smoothly, that by the time she noticed I was gone, I'd already be out of reach. I was going to peel myself away from her web one thread at a time until I was standing in daylight and she was still spinning lies in the dark. The first step was the bank. We had 3 joint accounts, and for years, I had done nothing more than glance at them once a month, trusting her to manage the budget while I handled the bills. That morning, while she was in the shower, I logged in and went cold. 2 of the accounts had been bled dry. One was practically dormant, used for trickle deposits. The other? Over $7,000 had been transferred in the last 6 months to something labeled Investment Support Consulting. I Googled the name. No website. No address. Just a number linked to a Shell LLC created 8 months ago. I knew that name didn't exist, but I did find the phone number connected to a billing profile. It belonged to Derek. She was funneling money to him, and somehow I hadn't seen it. I didn't confront her. I transferred what little remained from the active account into a private one I just opened that morning. I had already changed the password to our primary login, a step she wouldn't notice until she needed to move funds again. I even printed out the transfer logs and tucked them into an envelope, which I stored in the trunk of my car, beneath the spare tire, along with copies of the planner pages and screenshots. Next, I started moving things out of the house. Not big things. Just pieces of myself. My favorite books. My grandfather's old pocket watch. The wool coat my dad gave me before he passed. I took them one by one during errands or late-night walks. I stored everything in a storage unit under a different name. I paid cash. I didn't want a single transaction to leave a trail. She never noticed. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. What she did notice was my behavior. She started watching me. Not in a worried way. In an alert way. Like a predator unsure if the prey had suddenly grown fangs. She smiled more, asked more questions, tried to be warmer. One night, she even cooked. Like an actual meal. She hadn't done that in over a year. She poured wine, lit candles, made salmon the way I liked it. She wore that old sweater I once said made her look like autumn had a face. And when she leaned across the table and softly said, "I feel like we've been reconnecting lately," I felt something I hadn't expected. Fear. Because I realized, she knew. Maybe not everything. But she knew I was pulling away. She was trying to pull me back in. I smiled. I said, "Yeah, I feel that too." She reached out and held my hand. "You're still the safest place I've ever known." I swallowed. "You too." But inside, I was screaming. That night, I checked my phone for the GPS tracker I had installed on her car. She hadn't gone to Derek's in over a week. That terrified me more than anything. Because either she was done with him, or she was on to someone new. Or worse, she was on to me. I couldn't risk it anymore. I started planning the final step. I drafted an email to my boss asking for temporary relocation. A branch in Oregon had an open slot, and I could take a leave under the guise of mental health leave, which was something they had always supported. I made a list of people to notify. I even wrote a letter to her. Not a dramatic goodbye, just a firm statement with documentation, key dates, and no room for negotiation. But something happened the day before I planned to leave. Something that changed the timeline. She invited me to a client dinner. Said it was a +1 event. Something she insisted I attend. It was unusual. She never included me in work events unless it was to fill a seat or keep up appearances. This time, she seemed excited. Almost too excited. She picked out my outfit. Made the reservation herself. Told me, "This is going to be a big one, babe. You'll want to be there." I didn't know what she had planned. But when we walked into that restaurant, and I saw who was sitting at the table, I understood everything. And it was already too late. The restaurant wasn't one we'd ever been to before. Not our usual local spots, not the trendy places she bragged about at work. This one was quiet, expensive, dimly lit. The kind of place where the waiters wear suits and say things like, "We recommend the duck and croûte tonight." Lenora was practically glowing that night. She wore a deep burgundy dress I hadn't seen in years, maybe never, and heels that made her stand nearly eye to eye with me. She looked like a woman entering a celebration, not a woman with a husband she'd been lying to for over a year. I asked her who else would be joining us. She smiled and said, "Just a few people from the firm. Clients. No one you know." Her tone was airy, like the question bored her. But her hand? It was gripping her clutch too tightly. Her nails dug into the leather. I noticed. We were seated at a long table near the back. A place with privacy, away from the windows. The maitre d' greeted her like they'd met before. I sat down, took a slow sip of water, and kept my eyes calm while my pulse thudded like thunder in my ears. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a business dinner. It was an ambush. And I was about to meet the weapon. They arrived 10 minutes later, 2 people. A man and a woman. I stood when they did. It's automatic. How we're trained to be polite, even when we're walking toward the edge of a cliff. Lenora smiled wide, stepped forward, and kissed the man on the cheek. The woman stayed behind him, quiet, composed. And then Lenora said something that will echo in my head until the day I die. "Cliff, this is Derek's wife. And this," she said, turning to the man, "is Derek." My hand was still midair for a handshake when she said it. I froze. My fingers curled halfway, then dropped. My mouth dried up instantly. I stared at him, this polished, charming man in a midnight blue blazer and a smirk that had clearly survived worse confrontations. He reached out anyway and said, "Great to finally meet you. I've heard so much." I shook his hand. Lenora pulled out her chair, like this was just another Friday night. We sat. I didn't know what game she was playing, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let her see me flinch. If she wanted to test how much I knew, she'd find no cracks. If she wanted to provoke me into reacting, she'd be met with ice. The dinner began with fake pleasantries. Derek's wife, whose name I later learned was Vanessa, barely spoke. She picked at her salad, eyes darting between Lenora and Derek like she was trying to calculate the emotional geometry of what was happening. I caught her glancing at me once or twice, but I looked away. I didn't want to share looks of pity. I wasn't here to be anyone's project. Then, about halfway through the main course, Lenora raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. And just like that, the tone changed. Derek chuckled and added, "And mutual understanding." I stared at them. Then Lenora looked directly at me and said, "Cliff, I think this is a good time to be honest with each other. Don't you think?" That was it. Her play. Her move. This wasn't a business dinner. This was a performance. She had staged her own intervention. She wanted me to admit I'd found out. She wanted control of the narrative. If I exploded, she'd play the victim. If I left, she'd paint me as fragile. She wanted me exposed, confused, reactive. Instead, I smiled. I leaned forward, wiped my mouth calmly, and said, "Absolutely. Honesty is long overdue." Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of triumph and curiosity. She hadn't expected that. She thought I'd crack, accuse, shout, maybe even cry. But I gave her nothing. I turned to Vanessa and said, "You already know, don't you?" Vanessa nodded slowly. I nodded back. "Then I guess we're all in agreement that there are no secrets here." "Good," Lenora said quickly, too quickly, like she needed to reclaim her role. "Because I think it's time we all start being real. Cliff, I care about you. I always have. But we've grown in different directions, and I think we both deserve happiness." I tilted my head. "And this is how you thought to say that?" She blinked. "You invite me to a dinner with your affair partner and his wife to declare we've grown apart?" Derek opened his mouth to say something, but I raised a finger. "You should sit this one out. You've done enough." The silence was electric. Even the waiter paused nearby like he could feel it. I leaned back, set my napkin on the table, and looked straight at Lenora. I already moved most of my things out. I already closed the accounts. I already know about the shell company. I've seen your planner. I've seen the messages. And I've seen you at his house. So, yes, honesty is perfect. And I'll add this. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even sad. I'm done. She stared at me like I'd slapped her with silence. I looked at Vanessa and added, "I hope you find peace too." Then I stood, thanked the waiter, and walked out into the night. No rage. No last word. Just the sound of my footsteps, steady and final. But the story wasn't quite over. Because what she did next proved that even after all that, she still had one more lie to play. And this time, it was dangerous. I thought it ended there at that cold, expensive restaurant where the truth had been dressed up in fine linen and red wine. I thought my quiet exit, my composed words, had sealed the deal. But people like Lenora don't just let go. Especially when the story isn't theirs to control anymore. 2 days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, there was a typed letter, and signed, accusing me of financial misconduct. It claimed I had manipulated our joint accounts, forged her name, and acted out of emotional instability. The language was rehearsed. Legal. Like someone had been coached. At first, I laughed. It felt desperate, like a final swipe from a crumbling facade. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized what this really was. She was setting the stage. Not to get me back, but to punish me for walking away first. That night, I drove to the storage unit and gathered all the evidence I had. The photos, the account logs, the planner scans, the tracker reports. Even a video clip from the restaurant's parking lot security footage that showed her walking in with Derek hours before me. I organized it all into a folder, added a statement of my own, and sent it to my attorney, a woman named Geneva I'd contacted weeks ago when I first decided to plan my exit. She was calm, efficient, and when she read everything, she said one sentence I'll never forget. She's trying to rewrite the ending, but you've already written it. Within a week, my lawyer submitted a clean and thorough divorce filing. No drama, no accusations, just documentation, evidence, facts. Her team tried to delay, then push back, then negotiate. Geneva simply handed over the file. 3 days later, Lenora called me. Not text, not email. She called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was soft, shaky. She said she never wanted it to go like this, that she didn't mean to hurt me, and that maybe we could talk. We were good once, she said. We could maybe find that again. Then, as if catching herself, she added, or at least part peacefully. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I already had. I had found an apartment in Oregon. I had taken the relocation. I had surrounded myself with people who knew me not as the man betrayed, but as the man beginning again. I adopted a new cat. Spooner had gone to live with my sister, who adored him. My mornings became quiet again. My nights no longer carried the weight of suspicion. I started running. Nothing serious, just a few blocks each day. But with every step, I felt something unfamiliar returning. Myself. One morning, months later, I sat in a small cafe, sipping coffee and watching the rain without dread. No anxiety. No knots in my stomach. Just peace. And I realized then what freedom really meant. Not being alone, but being untangled. From the lies. From the gaslighting. From the pretending. Lenora eventually signed the papers. No counters. No fanfare. Just a signature and silence. I heard she moved cities. Maybe she tried to start over, too. I don't hate her. I don't even wish her ill. I just don't wish to be part of her story anymore. And for the first time in years, my story is mine again. Thanks for reading. I made it out. And if you're in it, if you're where I was, know this. You can too. You're not weak for staying, but you're stronger than you think for leaving.